Thank you very much, Sam, for giving us this opportunity to talk to you about various issues affecting or challenges or successes within your organization, GALS. Probably if you could just start by telling us, what is GALS?
GALS is an LGBT association in Zimbabwe. GALS is an organization that was formed to represent and to promote the rights of LGBTI persons in Zimbabwe. Many people, I think for many years, they knew us as gays and lesbians of Zimbabwe, but it's no longer called gays and lesbians of Zimbabwe. It is called GALS. GALS is not an acronym. Okay. Because the acronym, we have realized over the years that it was exclusionary in that it was not involving or including other identities, other genders, and also us knowing more through science and other studies that there are also, for instance, intersex persons, there are also transgender persons. They do not fit into the gay and lesbian dichotomy. So we had to be inclusive. So now as it stands, GALS is called GALS, an association of LGBTI people in Zimbabwe. The LGBTI then is inclusive in that we have all these other identities. Why was it formed? I think it's a very long history, as it started in the 80s up to 1990, when then people began to know more about GALS. It was basically an organization that came out of, people trying to organize social events, as a minority group, people needed to identify other people that were like them and just spend time together. People would organize sports, they would go out to clubs, we'll have social events and so on. But I think for the formation itself to actually then call it GALS, people don't realize that it came out of HIV, the pandemic that was spreading across the world. When we look at HIV, in the beginning, it was called a gay disease. And many gay men were dying of HIV, or this disease that people thought was affecting the community. People were presenting different symptoms, sort of malnutrition symptoms. People were losing weight, people were dying and could not be treated and so on. And there was no understanding of this disease, especially in the States and so on. But it also came to different parts of Africa, Asia and so on. And it became a gay disease. So our health system was not able to cope with some of these new diseases or this new virus that was coming into the health system. And as a community, information was also filtering through various media houses, print media, TV, that there was AIDS. And the LGBTI people realized that their friends were also dying, no home care. Worse off for the black community that had been disowned. Some of them had been disowned, were living on their own. They had no one to take care of them. So people decided that they needed to come together and find how they can assist and share information for survival. Lynn Francis then, who started what we call the center, which became a beacon for HIV response in Zimbabwe, providing support for nutrition and medication and mental health support for people living with HIV, was the first person who provided the gay community and lesbian community then a space to organize what then became GALS. It was also an opportunity to develop information. I think computers then at the time were there, and were these table computers that people would use printers to print information to then distribute to communities, letting them know the events that were happening around the city or cities, because we had then different pockets of gay communities self-organized in all the major cities, including Bulawayo. And it gave an opportunity for information dissemination. We also had a group of people who then volunteered to become counselors. They were trained by, the first group of people were trained by Connect. So Connect has also come a long way, Zimbabwe Institute for Systemic Therapy, Connect, in training a batch of gay and lesbian community members to provide counseling to those that had tested positive, who were struggling to accept the result. Back then there was no treatment. So the best way of survival at the time was making sure that we had stress. You manage your stress, you had to exercise, you had to eat well. Nutrition made a lot of us survive from that time who had tested for HIV. And it was also a space where we could provide home care and home visits, but also it not only focused then on HIV, but also look at what are the mental health issues that LGBTI persons were struggling with. And in those days, that's when a lot of us also were coming out. People would write to girls then as a small group of volunteers and say, I'm gay, I'm in Yazura, I'm gay in Mtoko, I'm gay in Chipinge, I'm gay in Gwanda, I'm alone, I've seen your box number, can you assist me because I'm struggling with my sexuality? And the systemic approach that girls was used then helped for people to cope with their illness, but it also helped for people to cope with finding out they were gay or lesbian. And this was also the struggle I think a lot of us have and continue to have, is that we live in a society that is very religious, that has a certain culture and so on. A culture that does not speak much about sex and sexuality at home. A lot of us grew up self-discovery when it comes to issues of sex and sexuality. So you find that then when you were confused about your sexual orientation, you didn't have anyone to approach and speak about. Not your mother, not your parents, not your aunt. So when then people find and realize there was this small group then that was called Gays and Lesbians of Zimbabwe, they were reaching out to say, I'm gay, is there a remedy to take out, to make me straight, or for me not to want or have the desire of same-sex attraction? Because I go to church, I've read the issue, and it's been preached about Sodom and Gomorrah, about not giving in to perversion and all that. Then you also had some that would come and say, I'm not sure if I'm possessed by one of my ancestors who's female because I'm male. I have this desire for other men. I have this inclination to be in a relationship, but I'm a man. Is there a remedy that also can assist? So you find even people who are in the medical field and are also confused about their sexuality would say, is there hormonal therapy that can be done where you inject me more testosterone and I can actually become more mannish and take away? So this is what we were being faced with, and the counseling helped for people to realize that within the variations of humanity and human species, there's a small minute number that could be attracted to same sex. Where was this coming from? There had been studies that had been done which were available within the public domain, whether through some of the articles that we have read in Times. There were some scientific books that had been written on these issues, but also people who have gone to tertiary institutions also have read about Freud and the stages of development and so on. So there was a bit of information that was out there that people could help and assist. But of course there was a lot of judgmental also from the public who were very conservative to understand these issues. So this gave, the birth to girls. It's only that, it came more visible when then girls was really growing and people were identifying with it, that then girls went to the book fair in 1995, where at the time, the theme of that year was looking at human rights. So the LGBTI persons or community also felt this could be an opportunity not to go, and the perception was they are coming to recruit people to become gay, and I still see it as the same conversation that, okay, if we give them rights, they'll be recruiting anyone, but that's not the case. Even in countries where these rights have been given and are protected, you still have a minute number of people that are LGBTI. So that was the sort of perception that people had, that why are they coming to the book fair? Because you also need to understand that the book fair at the time was a space where everyone and anyone would come in to enjoy the festive mood that was there. You also had people that were interested in academia who would also want to see different publications. You also had students that were interested in what are the latest books and novels that were there. So all age groups were in the space, and then having this LGBTI group coming to exhibit what people then would call pervasive information that should not be in the public eye, you know, it had to be challenged. And I think at the time, the state then said, you know, girls should not be exhibiting because the information that they have was encouraging and challenging our moral code. But of course, no one had really engaged with the information on what it actually said. So it was more of the response with their understanding of what homosexuality was.
But I wanted to ask, how you convinced Book Fair to give you a stand in the first place, considering the environment, then, you know, like, and from the information that you've also shared, you know, how then did you convince the Book Fair management to say, give us a stand, we want to exhibit and teach people more about gays and lesbians?
I think it's an understanding of what human rights are. And even as Africa is growing, coming out of colonialism, I think we are also still struggling with the embodiment and embracing of what the tenets and the principles and practices of human rights are. We are still resistant to being inclusive. But I think it's also coming from that history of human rights. Because when we look at the human rights discourse itself, when it started, it was coming out of the Second World War, where the Jews were killed. Hitler's time, people were killed for merely being different in terms of ethnicity. But also at the time, when you look at the queer movement, during that time, gay people in Germany were identified by a pink triangle. So anyone who was suspected to be gay or inclined to be, even though this was done very secretively, you find that at the time when they were being rounded up and being gassed in chambers, they had to put a pink triangle and isolate what then they see as lesbians or what they saw as gay. And these people were also killed in numbers for simply being perceived as homosexuals. So with that in mind, and the history of all the deaths that we got during World War, in addition to other, you know, countries just fighting and killing, and the nuclear bombs that were detonated in various countries, you find that society wanted to make peace. And to make peace, people had to agree on different principles. How do we protect humanity? And the formation of human rights came into fruition. That's why you find in the definition of what human rights are, they are alienable, they are indivisible, and they apply to all human, for you just being human. So we cannot say we want these rights and not the other rights. As long as a person is a human being, they deserve to be treated with dignity, with respect, and so on. And I think that's where the book fair was coming from, their understanding of what the principle and practices of human rights were, because this was a human rights theme. And I'm sure coming up with the theme, they had also deliberated on what that means. And then coming into our context, I think they were open to say, you know, with the country coming out of independence, where, you know, we're also trying to be inclusive of different races, blacks and whites, trying to live together and build the Zimbabwe we want. We're also looking at the Gukurahundi issues and so on. I think it was an opportunity to just bring everyone into the space and say, as a country, we were also moving towards the principles and practices of democracy and human rights. So that, I think that then they realize even minorities are part of human rights. even though they may be a minority, they deserve a space in society. And I think that's what gave them the idea of bringing in girls in the space. So even then, when the court, when the state challenged that, we went to the courts and to challenge the prohibition of girls from exhibiting. And the case was won by girls. We were allowed to exhibit. So for the following 5 years, it became the platform and the place for visibility at the time. I think people were now more determined to say, no, you can't put us aside and throw us through the window, or throw us with throwing the baby with water. We are part of society regardless. So every other year when the book fair would come up, girls would go and exhibit. It was a difficult time because you also had state security saying, you can't exhibit here. But even though we had the right, but we also had public interest. We had the public coming to girls. Who are you? What are you doing? And there were people who take pamphlets and information and so on. But of course, we also had days when we would not come and exhibit because it was too hot from people that were saying, no, they shouldn't be here. So we've also had years where we would just come in as a symbol of struggle, as a symbol of demanding inclusion, as a symbol of claiming space as human beings who may be different but have the same capacities like everybody else to be in that space. So we would put in a tent, a table and flowers, and we would have a team of volunteers who would come in to just make sure they are changing flowers. We would sometimes leave the information there. But interestingly enough, it also became a platform for more people to reach out to girls, from the community. People got to know more, and they wanted to know, because we were opening up to society for many people that for years had struggled with issues of sex and sexuality, and they would reach out for support to say, I'm also gay and I think I might be inclined. And these were coming from all ages, interestingly. And at the time, it wasn't even young people. I think young people then were still quite conservative as well, who were coming. It was actually older people who were coming and say, I've struggled with this all my life. I've been married all my life. I need help. I still feel part of my life there's something that's missing, something that I don't understand. And I need to find out what and why and how, given the way I was brought up in a Christian family, in the village, and so on and so on. So that's how I think a lot of people then got to know girls through the history of the book fair and then the state response and so on and so on. So when we then look at the history itself and where we have also come from today, it was a struggle. I was telling the other friends the other day that when I look at it personally myself, when I look at the LGBTI struggle for inclusion and rights, it's in 3 phases. The first phase was when we could go out in Fair Street, and then it was Fair Street, very beautiful street, with shops and barbers shops and Mikkels and all other shops we could buy and get our fashion. It was the place to be. We would go there, sit, eat, drink, laugh with people, walk down the streets in the of Harare and so on. And Bulawayo would also be there with the community there. Would go to Mutare, Vumba and so on for holidays, and it was a space for people being the public were actually curious to say, who are these people? People would ask, so you act like a girl, what are you? Who are you? And it was fun. It was safe. It wasn't, people would stand by the roadside and just watch you and laugh and pinpoint and so on and so on. But after the book fair, that's when issues around hate speech started coming in, the violence, the harassment, and so on started growing on that time. And I think having our former head of state, who's now late, he was quite open and vocal about LGBTI issues and homosexuality. And I think as a leader, I sort of understood where he was coming from. You're a father of the house, you might have one child who's different. So you're also bound to speak very negatively about the behavior of one child to deter the other children. Because I think it was also coming from the perception that they wanted to turn everyone who's men and women to be gay, which is what I said earlier, that it's not the case. Yeah. So it became a battle between what was happening within the political context of Zimbabwe. We had high unemployment, ISAP came in, more people became unemployed, poverty, economic meltdown, and so on and so on. And because the world was also calling for human rights, democracy, inclusion, and so on, LGBTI rights became topical that time, not only in Zimbabwe, in Africa, in Europe, in America. The struggle then was also on the rise. So what was happening in America had an effect here, because Americans were claiming for inclusion and protection also within America for LGBTI persons, lack of harassment and so on and so on, and there was demand to improve their policy and laws as well. It filtered also here. So with world stage set for at the UN around human rights, because you remember human rights wanted peace, not war. There were also wars happening around the world. Iraqi war was happening, the Balkan Belt had its own wars, and so on and so on. I think the LGBTI issue was also very topical. So which then became a tension between, do we speak up about LGBT rights, yet our issues about economy, which was also, really going down. IMF demanding Zimbabwe to be accountable in certain things, the World Bank also making certain demands and provisions, and also Zimbabwe fighting back for its survival as a country in terms of sovereignty, in terms of its own autonomy, in terms of protecting its resources and so on. So it was easy for the state then to say, no, the reasons also that some of these provisions are put in place is because we had specifically said we don't want gay rights and we don't want gay people, which was then considered very un-African and so on. So we became the scapegoat of the conversations at the time. Even as we sit here, our economic history is struggling. LGBTI people are still here and existing globally and in Africa. And it has not really changed much with the rhetoric of not wanting gay people. So I think that's where it came from. So this was the second phase where girls and LGBTI persons experience a lot of violence in the public, raids. The state machinery and responses to that was raids, arrests, and left, right, and center. You would try and organize a small group for a meeting just to discuss sexual and reproductive health or HIV, or because remember the HIV discourse started with LGBTI persons, but of course in the midst of that second phase I'm talking about, which went on for more than 10 years, LGBTI persons were left out in the HIV response. So we continued to survive on our own outside the mainstream, because then the HIV came into the general population and it's no longer a gay disease, but everyone then was dying. And you could remember those days also, women being accused that they wanted to inherit the homes that their husbands had extended, or the women had extended because people were going across border to South Africa and rebuilding and remodeling their homes. So there were also myths around that. So that second phase also had issues that affected us politically, socially, socially when you look at health and so on. We were still struggling. We were getting treatment by donations from people that were coming outside the country. Nutrition also remained in the midst of that. Yet the general public could now access treatment easily within facilities. For us then, who were accessing in the facilities as well, you also find that there was still stigma then if we're known to be gay and bisexual. So these were the things that we went. Then the third phase now is the phase we are in now, where the political rhetoric has really gone down. The environment is sort of quiet when it comes to the focus of LGBTI persons, because I think also state and the public realize that it doesn't change an economy when you constantly scream about we don't want homosexuals. What changes in economy is to address the things that we are faced with today. Issues around corruption, issues around accountability and transparency of state and those within government structures to the public when it comes to use of state resources. Issues around the general human rights of Zimbabweans, looking at issues around development. These are the issues that the current or the Second Republic is looking at, issues around development, and not concerned itself with LGBTI issues per se. And for us, the LGBTI issues should have been a social issue than political. And I think it became so politicized that it was really difficult to maneuver and understand what it is that we wanted. And I think also there's still a lack of understanding of why LGBTI people asking for special rights. What are they talking about? At the backdrop of basic survival, which people always think, which mirror then do you wear and say it's important for us to waste our time speaking? But at the same time, people don't realize that not speaking about a minority has the very impact that they're experiencing today, where any minority or any voice of disdain that comes and say we are not happy with the way things are being run in the country, you could be arrested for the mere fact that you don't agree with the status quo that is in the space. So the more you hate one group, it's easier to plant hate in you and for you to easily hate other people. Even when you look at our current political discourse, people cannot sit at the table from two opposition parties and speak about Zimbabwe as a collective which we all belong to and aspire to build as a collective. People are always throwing each other bad names, bad vibes, naming and calling each other names that perhaps are unprintable, because they cannot merely coexist and still see each other as people that have potential to build the Zimbabwe want as a collective. So levels of intolerance have grown in our society. There's so much hate, there's so much intolerance, there's so much division. There are so many divisions within society. We are I always say that Zimbabwe is a state that needs healing. As a country, we have so much pain and anger in us, and a lot of it is expressed when then people speak about LGBTI persons. It's like a poisonous snake spitting venom, the way sometimes people talk about LGBTI people, especially within the social media platforms. But when you then go into the public, sometimes you find when you spoke to individuals, it's a different tone, even though they might not like you or they tolerate you and so on, but it's not as harsh as sometimes you read on social media. Now, in terms of the LGBTI rights discourse, we always say there are no special rights that LGBTI persons are asking for. They are not separate rights from the current rights that are entitled to all human beings. But I think when we look at then our constitution, is the more of the applicability of it. If it says that every citizen has a right to privacy, and coming from an LGBTI person, it's almost like you don't have a privacy. What then happens in your own room became, people use a magnifying glass to try and find what is it that you're doing in your home, who are you with. If then people know you're attracted to same sex, it becomes a whole circus and a public spectacle. It may even affect your right to employment, to get a job, your right to economic emancipation, all those kind of things then are taken away, because if your workplace get to know that you're LGBTI, you're likely to be dismissed. I've had cases, labor cases, where people would say, look, our country was found on, when you got employed, it was never mentioned. But now that they found out you're part of the LGBTI, they'll say, well, our company was founded on Christian values. We can't keep you. Yeah. Or they start refusing in some way or the other, covertly or overtly, responsibilities are not given to you. Even if you're a journalist like you, when you used to get good cases and be assigned to, they start not giving you the cases, despite the competence that you have. Even when we look at our current constitution, it speaks about non-discrimination. It speaks about right to dignity. It speaks about right to association, assemble, right to participate in public spaces. That should be a right. Right to health. But when then your sexuality comes out in any of the platforms and spaces, the treatment becomes different. Currently, what is in our constitution, when you look at it, it says same-sex marriage is prohibited. So it really refers much to the marriage and not to the person who may identify as such, because our preamble is quite clear. The first sentence actually says in all our diversity. So I think it's just acknowledging the diversity that is there. You could be Mushona, you could be Ndebele, you could be tall, you could be short like me, you can be big, small, pink, yellow, green, it's acknowledging that. And also when we look at the history of our struggle, I know so many gay people that are, a part of the war, but their sexuality is never mentioned because it wasn't an issue, and it shouldn't be an issue today. So when people also look at LGBTIs, they think people now want to flaunt in the public, they now want to hold hands. Why can't they do it in their privacy, their own home? It's what is happening within the privacy that is making people speak out. Okay. The violence, the disownment, the forced marriages, the rape that happens against lesbian women, the mental health issues that comes with rejection, with not being given the same opportunities when you're a student and your parents find out you're again, say they will not pay school fees for you. Or even if a male or female is caught writing a letter to another person, you find if you are inclined to same sex, there's bound to be dismissal from school. But if it's a boy writing to a girl, they're simply disciplined. So it's those kind of treatment that people are crying about. They're not crying about, we want to hold hands. Remember, LGBTI persons are still guided by our culture and practices, and if you believe in certain religious practices, you also follow that. It doesn't mean that your moral compass of who you are as a person and how you need to conduct yourself in the public changes because you have a different sexual orientation. That's not what it is. But I think it's more around the treatment of it. And I think this is why we always encourage some of the discourse that is happening within the public. Talking about it is important. Even if it means there's more negativity to the discussions, but let's talk about it. Because talking about it also helps people to realize, as much as I might not be comfortable with a gay or lesbian or bisexual person or an intersex person, they are part of society. I may be moving with them. They may be among my friends. They might be among my networks. They might be among the congregation at church. They could be part of our village committee and so on. They could be a farmer. They could be a vendor. But how we treat each other is with respect and dignity. That's basically where the discourse around LGBTI is currently sitting. Let's talk about it. Talking about it is to address the evils that comes with silence. It's the same thing, when I look at it, I was actually having a conversation the other day with a group of policymakers and community organizations that when you look at the issue of racism, and the first thing I asked them was, how many of you play soccer? I think half of the room raised or watch soccer, especially international soccer, the Arsenals, the Man U's and so on. And a lot of them raised their hands. And I said later on when I was presenting my issue around human rights and why it is important to protect minorities, I say to them, do you realize today as we all sit here, there's so much racism in soccer? The players that we cheer every day are always called monkeys, all sorts of names that are unprintable during soccer player, but we still all get glued to watch soccer. They are even now betting shops around the country playing soccer. We have husbands sometimes and boyfriends who would not speak to their wives when their team is lost, but there's so much racism in it. We can tolerate racism to watch soccer because I've never seen Man U supporters or Arsenal or Liverpool or whatever team coming out and say, can we go and write to FIFA or whichever body, because I'm not a soccer fan, I'm not sure which institution, but I think FIFA or COSAFA or whatever, and demand that racism end. I've never seen from fans of those teams writing to those bodies and say let racism end, because racism still affects our brothers and sisters playing soccer, but it also affects us today, even when you look at the issues around sovereignty and so on within the political space. But we are quite happy to hate our brother and sister in our home because they happen to have a different sexual orientation. But we can tolerate soccer and not say anything to do with racism, which affects us as blacks. Even when people went to war, it was also fighting issues around racism and how we're seen as inferior, who cannot run their country, while our resources were being plundered. So this is how it plays out when we hate a minority. Today it might be LGBTI persons. I'm sure in the future, when the war is won and everyone is sitting pretty and happy and inclusive of LGBTI persons, we'll always find another scapegoat that we may not like in society. So human rights is simply saying, how do we coexist with all that diversity and still be able to live with each other, despite the fact that I have to respect you and you respect me because of my different orientation. And I think this is where Gauss is sitting today, just simply to change the social fiber of society, that we just need to be inclusive. We need people to thrive and be who they are. And just to also say that, I was also giving another example that a lot of these computers and gadgets, and recently I also saw a lot of celebrities celebrating that they now have these new phones. I'm not sure which brand it is, but they were exciting that they now have the first item in the country to have such a phone. I've seen celebrities and people on the streets embracing different fashion designer fashion brands. I've seen people getting excited by different shoes and so on. But what they also don't realize, a lot of those products are actually done and designed and thought about by gay and lesbian people worldwide. Go to Silicon Valley, it's full of gay and lesbian people who are quite creative and geniuses. But when we're holding these gadgets, we don't think this was made by a gay person and so on. So it's also what we're talking about. How do we include gay people in the development agenda, in farming, in building our industry, investing in our country, than throwing them out, or by making the environment so difficult that they have to go and invest in other countries instead of here. We have so many people that left during the time when there were so many raids and harassment and arrests, who are brainy, hardworking, who would also want to come and invest in Zimbabwe, but they also have concern around the right to property. Will their property be protected if then they are found to be gay, and so on and so on and so on. These are creative people. A lot of our entertainment industry worldwide also has gay people. And we listen to their music, we wear their fashion, we sleep on their designer beds. A lot of people are shipping things out of the country that have been designed by gay people, but we don't see it that way. Let's look at also development. A lot of development and resources that comes in the country are taxpayer monies from other countries. Gay people are paying tax. And their resources are coming here to end poverty in Africa or in any other place. But we don't think about it. I think a lot of times people then zero around the sexualization of LGBTI persons, which is sad, because I think people are more than sex. They are more than their sexuality. We don't think about sex every other minute. When people talk about, they want marriage, they want everything is zeroing down on sex. But there's more to offer that individuals have, and I think it's the same with even heterosexuals. You don't think about sex every day. You want to make money, you want to hustle, you want to buy a house, you want to send your kids to the best schools, and so on and so on. Gay people have the same desires. They also want a family. People always think, well, if you are two same-sex couples, then how do you have a family? We do find our families. Maybe the definition of what a family is might differ. But there are many gay people out there raising children, and very well-rounded children, regardless of sexuality. Because the fear is then if there are two men, and what will the child call them, and so on and so on. The world has changed. You just need to look out and realize that there are people that are bringing children who are well-grounded, well-rounded, and so on. There are many ways to have children. It's not always that it has to be penetrative sex. There's surrogacy, there's adoption. There are people that have had their siblings who have passed on, taking care of those kids and so on. They're still kids. So it's a whole lot of discourse that we need to unpack around the LGBTI than focusing just specifically, they just want to get married. How can they marry in this context and put marriage at the forefront when the simple basic rights of of being included, protection, and acknowledgement in a society like ours is not even there. So I think for us, it's just looking at that social transformation. We are not expecting it today. We're not expecting it in the 90s. But I see from the times that we've been engaging and talking, there's a shift. And a lot of shift is also generational. I think younger people are more understanding, more exposed to LGBTI persons, and understand either through movies, books, friends at school, and so on, compared to the old guard who are still very conservative and they're all difficult to change.
Yeah.
And it's expected.
Yeah, I didn't want to take you back then when Girls was formed, you know, and you get to talk about your members, you know, like what you earlier on said, that they were calling you and say, this is what I'm experiencing, am I this and that? How will they accept it within their family and the society that they were living in back then compared to now?
I think back then, for those that came out, I think the journey was the same in terms of sometimes in any process. It's like when we used to talk about HIV, you get your results, there's shock, there's confusion, there's denial. You go through that motion of denial, you go to almost acceptance, and perhaps then go back to denial again until you've got to a level where you're like, I can live with HIV. So it's the same process that individuals who are gay, first of all, as an individual, go through. They come to you, just like a lot of us, we went through the same process of rejecting, it can't be. Why me? Is it because I used to steal grandmother's peanut butter? Why? Or that's why I'm gay? Or the sugar that I used to put my hand in and lick? You know, also things come in. That's why you find these high levels of suicidal ideation. At the time, you want to kill yourself. You then try and seek help. And help is difficult because when you seek help, there's a lot of rejection. You go to church, you become the sermon of the Sunday. You go to traditional healers, they'll probably give you a whole bucket of mutis for you to wash with. You go to some pastors, they'll pray for you and put you fast and all that. So different processes, people go through it. And after years of going through it, you realize I have to live with myself. Then the acceptance come in, and sometimes it also goes back to denial and rejection and until acceptance. So it's the same thing that people experienced at the time, but the period I think was shorter for acceptance. You know, people would come out to their families or discover that they are. A lot of them were not thrown out of, at the time I think there was a balance. A lot of them were not really thrown out of the home. They were given ultimatums. If you don't stop, you are no longer our child. They no longer leave the home, because at the time, you know, parents were quite strict about leaving the home and coming back. You know, because the assumption was you are going out there then to do homosexuality, whatever that homosexuality was. Then it also then gets to a position where sometimes the parents, or especially the mother, would say, so people sometimes end up in heterosexual marriages to fulfill the demands of the family. Because my one was so stroke. Or, you know, then people, you know, but still the parents might not be at the back of their mind. Now, what's different now? And I think also at the time, the parents and public and relatives wanted to know, because it became sort of like a new phenomena, only that it was hidden. You know, our cultural silence. Now, if we are failing to impregnate in the home, whatever, I don't know if there was an explanation why they are failing, and I'm not sure why they determined it was the husband who's failing. Maybe because you know, there are all these things. It was silent, and don't tell that these are not your biological kids. So it was the same thing with issues. So when then it was started coming out, people also felt curious to say, why are you telling us? So also people assume it was also coming from the white community, but a lot of black people had no contact with white community, because we always say and joke that there's this side of Samora and this other side of Samora. So a lot of people live the other side of the Samora Nakle, Nora Kwadzana. So when there was not Kuyaku town was expensive, and when there was a related issue, and they want to buy an ice cream for Christmas or something. So the contact was not with any white person, but it was just discovering yourself, but had no information. So you are confronted by parents and relatives who have no information. You also don't have information. So the only thing you could explain was, I have this attraction. So the family were also bound to say, okay, I know people that used to have their sisters who would take them and they story and people would go. Because remember, with my area session around counseling, people would come and say, I want to change. So it was also coming to, I want to change. But then you get to a point where you say, I just have to live with who I am. Living with who you are had nothing to do with, I now want to have sex. It was about, let me just accept who I am. If I don't, it's either I'll kill myself or I'll continue to suffer. So acceptance was a matter of being comfortable with who you are. Comfortability also meant you could actually sometimes end up with a wife. So those things were happening. What has changed today about coming out? I think more young people I see today are already out and about. I think it's an issue of information, more exposure. They are more assertive. We were not as assertive. There was no computer, there were no Facebooks and so on to get information. The only source of information we could get, a bit of information, was the community libraries. It's a shame that a lot of them have closed down, but I think for me those were critical points in my life, reading and looking at different books and information. So now there's more information. A child or a person can simply say, I have this confusion, what does it mean? They simply go and ask Sekuru Google and get a bit of information. And now also there's also demonstration of videos, people are explaining their own struggles and so on. So information is making people more open to themselves. But we poisoned the chalice. Let me put it like that. The middle time when there was a lot of homophobic rhetoric in the politics, in our social media and so on, poisoned the minds of families and the public to a point where so everything became what the late used to say about homosexuality, to a point where if then a child who is struggling comes out to the parents, coming out is a matter of saying, Mama, I think and the child parents supposed to help. They'll get a beating, they'll be flogged to the pastor, or depending what your belief system is, and it becomes a whole thing. So by the time sometimes people interface with us, they'll have either gone through conversion therapy that is painful, heartbreaking, and it leaves them with some mental issues.
Let's go to the church. We go to praise and worship. This is where love, peace and harmony is being preached.
Yes.
But one thing that the church doesn't want to accept from the pastor, probably right to the last man in the church, is accepting gays and lesbians. From your experience, what might be the reason behind? Politically, we might say, yes, it's a dirty game. The players, want to play it dead. But let's go to the church where peace, love and harmony is preached every day. But at the end of the day, there is segregation, there is discrimination, there is hate.
Just like society has evolved, when I say society, even just looking at the Zimbabwean context, I always like people when they always think of the old days when we used to get milk by the door with the milkman, or would buy with those plastic discs and we'd get our milk and no one would steal the milk. So society has evolved. Religion has evolved. The religious practices I used to get and the teachings and the support I used to get when I was younger is not what I see today. The church back then was more inclusive and more tolerant, more building, more communal. Yaivaka communities and individuals. You know, if you go to confession or you would ask for the audience of the pastor or the priest, you would go and speak and he would listen to you. And he would say, yes, the Bible says this. I want you to continue to abstain. I want you to continue to pray. God will answer you. We had something to hold on to in our struggle. You know, you would feel even other members of faith within your church felt for you. Even if there was a sick person, people would go together without even asking. Don't want to marry. You know, the society was very closely knitted. And I think with the influx of people into bigger cities, people become more individualized. Okay. So in individualism, what I'm saying is that people would come to visit you in town and say, hey, it started separating the way people used to live in society. And the religion we have now in the cities, if you look at, for instance, in cities, even in rural communities, it's the same, because the same pastor are visiting that side and so on and so on. You find it's very judgmental at every level. I remember back then, you know, the people that used to bear the brunt of exclusion in church at the time, in 80s, 90s, were more related to single mothers. If a woman has a child, or she gets pregnant, or she gets divorced, those used to be singled out in church. But many groups were sort of not that. But the conversation kept coming, how do we support them? So there was also mechanism supporting them, but I think single mothers felt it, that they are being singled out, or even if you then divorce. So where we are now today, you find that the messaging is separated individuals. If you are not giving too much in church, even your sitting position is changed. Kuna vanogara kumasofa emberi, kune vepakati, kune vekuend. That's already isolating people in some way by class without realizing. So classism is not just in society to say there are those in the middle or hidden suburbs, even in church we now sit by class. Who gives more? Who dresses better? Who stay in certain part of town? That is started, or that now exists. When you also look at the communal life, you can even feel it in back one ningi kukarwarwa, kuno wano batsirwa, kuno kwa ningi kukarwara, wanongozo endao. You know, all that we've unconsciously become very judgmental. Part of it is what I said, the healing of the country is needed. We've gone through so much that we don't realize it is an effect even in our own faith, in our own practices, in our own contact with other people, not just LGBTI, just even the person next door. If in some churches, I'm not sure which churches, but I know, and I've had in my studies and meeting with people, like interacting with people, where someone would say, I don't speak to my brother anymore because he's not born again. Division has already happened. So imagine if then you come out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, when already these divisions are there, it means you're at the periphery of church. The understanding we had back then was a church is a place where thieves come in, prostitutes comes in, they want forgiveness, they want to end some of their perversions. And in ending perversion, it doesn't mean it will be wiped out at once. You keep kneeling and begging and praying and feel. So sometimes you so it meant because you are human, there are times when you would fall, and there are times when you get up with your God, and there are times when you fall. But now it's almost like even the people who are making comments on social media about LGBTI, it's like they already have seats in heaven. They've judged you. Their sins are the ones that will get them to heaven, and yours are worse than anything else. It's very judgmental. These are people, products of the church, making such comments, bringing such hate, such venom. If it was Jesus' time, I'm sure they'll be flocking us to the cross and nailing us on the cross and say, these ones will not go into heaven because I've been told they are the worst sinners. This is the society we live in today.
So what is your message to the preacher, the man who is so much following it, whose word, is a command to his congregants?
Preach tolerance, preach inclusion, preach love, preach peace. Because the only one who can forgive our sins is God himself. That's why they say, do not judge lest you be judged. No one is perfect because we are humans. We are all built in the likeness of the Lord, but we are not God. That's why which we continue through our journey of life to work on. That's why even when they say you are forgiven, you can be forgiven by grace or whatever, it also depends what your belief system is. But I think that a lot of ethical life is complex. It's not as easy as we have seen it, because God continues to unveil things that we never thought we could. For instance, people thought, okay, he's born in the likeness of God, but there are some human beings born today like, is there a person who looks like that? Is there a person who behaves like that? Just like we've seen with cell phones. We used to have those landlines.
Yeah.
And now we've got smartphones, and I think we'll get to a point where perhaps we'll just have a little button on your forehead where it just got, hello. We have not stopped because the world is evolving. So it's about preaching tolerance, acceptance, inclusion, love, building communal lives. We want to go back where I can get along with my brother without judging me that I'm not going to this church or that church. Even people, when they were from different religious sects growing up in the village, would all congregate by the shop. Some of them have dilapidated. My drinks, my biscuits, would laugh and we all walk home singing and happy as kids or as adults, and parents would walk also marathon, and people that was life. But it has evolved. Where we're in society, we just need love, tolerance, and acceptance to some extent, in acceptance in all over, so that at least there is that harmony. The world is sick. That's why even when we look at some of the issues, we continue to say that it's an H Metro on our social media. Some of it's because people no longer receive the love and support that they can. Not just LGBTI persons. Even if you are failing in life, you can be castigated to a point where you feel like, I want to take my life. I've seen musicians of late saying also, I'm leaving my band because I can't cope, I have so many responsibility, and people rush to mental health. So imagine mental health issues gay people have because of toxicity within society. But also look at young people today who are into drug abuse and so on and so on. They're also failing to get support system, because even the church itself that's supposed to be building, yes, they are not all churches. I'm just giving a general view of what I see. There are good churches that are inclusive, that have also welcomed LGBTI persons that I see today, and I see those LGBTI young people thriving in school, their career, and are able to make informed, better decisions for themselves and their families. But there are some that the majority that remains at the margins of society.
As we conclude, Sam, what is your message to some of the negative comments that has been posted in the comment section, that will continue to be posted on the comment section, as we take advantage of this platform to educate and inform our brothers and sisters and everyone else who has been watching?
I think when we look at society in general, there are people that prefer to remain ignorant and just want to criticize things for the sake of criticizing without really self-reflecting. If it was me, how could I have done this? If it was me, how could I have copped into this? That's why I said, if you are not in someone's shoes, don't rush to judge or complain why they are the way they are. Whether being single, unmarried, divorced many times, and so on, you cannot judge them by the fact that you feel they are failure if you are not in their shoes. Give yourself time to know them. So some of the comments I see, some of them come out of ignorance. It's like as if people don't have their own opinions to talk about. But there are some that are quite hurtful because they say it's not part of our culture, it's an African. But when we really delve down to what is culture and an African, we don't have one culture, we don't have one Africa. That's why even people in Europe think Africa is a country, because it's of those ignorant positions that we're coming from. Even in Zimbabwe, we don't have one culture. We have many multi-cultures that are in, and some things that are done in one culture, you might even cringe. It's the same thing in Africa. Some things that are done in West and Eastern Africa, you would cringe, but they are part of their culture. So I think it's just to understand that in society there's diversity. We need to be more knowledgeable and more open to get to know that in society there's diversity and there are people who are just different. Just make their life bearable. Engage and ask them how their life is for you to appreciate where they are coming from. People don't take that. You also hear people say, why waste our time is to find in Zara than utora Ngochan. Ngochan might actually be a decision maker in those offices that you want change in. But because they said, I will fix them. You get what I'm saying? So gay people are found in all structures of society. They are a vendor, they are unemployed, they are in your office, they are in your church, they are in your parliament, they are in your governance structure, they are in civil service, they are all over the place. They are even decision makers. But because we are so blinded by the mere fact that they are busy having sex 24/7, we don't get to appreciate the skills that they have, which is the Dolce and Gabbanas you are wearing, the gadgets that I have spoken about that you are holding. They can bring so much to society, and they are talented. They have skills, and the way do they get those skills? From the same God that created all of us. Who are we to judge? I'm sure God is the one who can judge. But I think sometimes you find here on earth, we already have people that have judged others and simply dismissed them. We are not asking you to give them any special rights. Just treat them the same way you want to be treated.
And your message to your community, you cannot leave them out, because some of them obviously, they are also reading some of the hate comments that have been posted in the comment section, and also the experience that they are getting within the society that they are living in.
Well, to the LGBTI community, from the work that I've been doing with the community and understanding as a therapist, as a programmer, as an influencer, as somebody who's engaged in different platforms around the world, what I would say is that change starts with you, the individual. What type of a world or a type of Zimbabwe or Africa do you want? It starts with you. How are you changing the people around you to accept you? Changing society is not a one-man's game. It's not my responsibility or responsibility of the girls team or those in organizations. It's the responsibility of all of us. So wherever you are, I ask you and applaud you and implore you to take little steps in changing the society around you. Change might not happen now. We might not enjoy the privileges that other LGBTI persons around the world are enjoying, but we are the ones who are going to make change for the future. I might not enjoy the rights that I'm asking for today or tomorrow, but I'm sure for future generation things will change. Don't give up, work hard, get every opportunity you can get in life and be who or whatever you want in life. It's possible. You just need to be resilient, to believe in yourself, and to believe in those that have accepted you and that are currently supporting you in your endeavors. That's my message to the LGBTI community.